Welcome to Mystery of the Soul, where curiosity meets spirituality. Are you curious about metaphysics, the mystical, and the supernatural? Would you like to learn how they are all part of contemporary spirituality? Join me, Leo McCarthy, a spiritual mentor, psychic medium, Reiki master, EFT tapping practitioner, and a shaman.
And I'm Julia LeBlanc, an awakening soul, a doctor of physical therapy, author, yoga teacher, and Reiki master. We hope that our unique perspectives open the door to an amazing journey of discovery.
Please join us and our guests in conversations about spiritual awakenings, our life's purposes, and mysteries of the soul. Welcome back to Mystery of the Soul, guys. This is Leo, and I have Julia here with me today. We have a special guest with us today from the occult world, Christopher Penczak. And Christopher, I'm going to turn it over to you and introduce yourself and just tell us what got started on this path.
Thank you so much, Leo. Well, my name is Christopher, and I'm a modern witch. So, as I kind of got into occultism and witchcraft and magic as a skeptic, I really felt like it was not something a sane person would follow. Honestly, a very good friend of mine from growing up, I got into it around 18 or so. And my art teacher from when I was a little kid into adulthood had become this family friend. Once I graduated from Catholic school, she felt it was safe to tell me that she was a witch. And I just thought she was crazy. Like, I just thought, that was something on TV, and it was way before the pop culture witch and way before social media and it being so prevalent. And I just thought she joined a cult, and I wanted to rescue my adult friend from the cult, like an arrogant 18-year-old, And so she said she'd talk to me about it, but she really asked that I get some language so we could talk a common language. So the first book she gave me before she talked to me was a book on quantum physics. And I was sort of weirded out by that, but I was a science guy, so I liked it. And then she gave me a book on hermetic philosophy. And then finally, the third book was a book from her teacher, Laurie Cabot, called Power of the Witch. And after I finished those books, she's like, now we can have a conversation. And by the end of that, in our first conversation, I felt comfortable enough that, it wasn't a cult, it wasn't dangerous, she was safe. And I was interested. So she started teaching me meditation, and she started teaching me tarot, and I got to be a guest at her coven, and she taught me some basic witchcraft stuff. And eventually she sent me to Laurie Cabot to take classes with her because she felt like I kind of outgrew what she could teach me. And that's really how I started in all of this.
Christopher, what are some of the myths or misconceptions that people have around occult?
That it is evil or scary. When people say, why do you use the word occult, or, isn't there something better? And when I first started doing this as a full-time vocation, people would say, why do you have to use the word witch, or why do you have to use the word pagan? Can't you say earth religions? Because there's a lot of misconceptions around those words. So when someone says, oh, the occult is scary, the occult is evil, I'm like, well, what do you think it means? And we started to dissect the word, and the word occult goes back to ocular, which means sight and vision, and it's something that's hidden from vision. So I'm like, this is the occult's mostly things people don't want to look at, don't want to see, aren't interested in, but some weirdos like me are kind of into it, and we want to kind of experience things that are hidden from reality, hidden from, everyday thought and consciousness in society. So really to get over that hump that it's not evil, both witchcraft and occultism, when I'm more in the holistic world, I often used for many years the word metaphysics. But that has confusion to it as well. Like, I had somebody at a class say, well, did you get your degree at metaphysics and MIT? Like, she thought I was a physicist, like an astrophysicist. And I was like, oh no, that's not what that means. And there's no good word, So that's why I kind of like the word witch, because I think it attracts the people who are called to the witch soul and feel a kindling in their life for it. It sort of repels the people who, are never going to be open to it. And there's a small segment of people who are sort of repelled by it, but also fascinated by it. And they might have a past life trauma with witchcraft, or they might have some societal programming around it. And those are the people you can have a conversation with and at least show them what it is from my perspective.
Christopher, for those who have never really explored witchcraft, but get what Hollywood shows maybe, right? How would you define magic, and what would you say is actually happening when someone performs like a spell?
Sure. So the classic definition of magic, I think I'd be remiss with all my educators if I didn't quote it, is magic is the art and science of causing change. And usually in conformity with will is how that ends. That's a quote that's usually attributed to Aleister Crowley, but there's a couple different versions of it. But if you don't want to be that fancy about it, it's really a process by which to have a conversation with the universe. So there's two sides to magic. What we might think of as psychic ability and divination and intuition is the listening to the universe and the casting of the spells, which a lot of people make comparisons to prayer. And I love and hate that. For basic introductions, it's okay to say it's like prayer, but it's really nothing like prayer. But the idea to be able to speak to the universe and to hold your intention and to seek to manifest, that's really what magic is. So when I cast a spell or I'm doing a ritual, there's traditional techniques of how you hold yourself, the postures of the body, just like in yoga. There's traditional ways to say things or certain phrases that have a power behind them because they've been said so many times. And then you work your own personal intention into it, whether it's lighting a candle or lighting some incense or, speaking a petition and burning that up, or doing a devotion to a particular, deity or spirit, or calling on the ancestors. But you're asking for a beneficial change in your life. A big thing about magic, at least the way I teach it, although not everybody teaches it this way, is that magic is best when it conforms with your true will. And your true will is different than your desire, because your desire comes from ego and personal self, which isn't bad. We believe everything is sacred, so your ego is sacred too. But it's not who should be driving your life. What should be driving your life is what we might call your higher self or your watcher. And it has a pattern and a will and an intention behind it. And the more you can align this personal self with that higher, deeper self, the better your magic becomes. And a lot of magical practice is trial and error to figure out what your soul wants.
Now, I know you had mentioned about going to Catholic school.
Yes, 13 years, kindergarten through 12.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think a lot of people would assume that you would just, you'd end up rejecting spirituality altogether. But
I almost did.
I was going to say, but now it seems like you kind of carried pieces of the tradition into your current path. So what wisdom from your Catholic upbringing still feels like it very much serves you today?
That's a great question. I don't know if I'd specifically make it Catholic, but being an occultist, one of the things that's kind of a key function for a lot of people is that all traditions and all religions have a truth, and they're all different perspectives trying to look at something that's undescribable. So the older you get into it and the more mature you get in your practices, the less reactive you get. So like most people who leave Catholicism just to leave it, or leave Catholicism to become a witch or an occultist or something new age, often have a lot of anger towards their birth religion. And part of your healing process is to sort of resolve that and realize like the people you knew were doing the best they could with where they were at and trying to raise you in the things that they felt were important, or what they were taught by their parents, who were taught by their parents, and so on. So there's always a truth to it. So like if you look at the ritual technology of Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox traditions, and as an occultist of the Western occult traditions, how we sometimes refer to it, that includes Judaism, Christianity, Islam. We call it Western, but it's really Egyptian, Sumerian, Mediterranean. All of these things kind of mingle together in the current that I received from my teachers. And I think there's truth to it. Like I'm a Hermetic Kabbalist as part of my occultism, which is just a fancy word of saying it's an Egyptian take, or a modern Egyptian take on Jewish teachings. So all the Old Testament stuff I learned in Catholicism plays into my understanding of Kabbalah, even though I'm not a Jewish practitioner of it or not practicing the Jewish branch of Kabbalah. So I think there's a lot of things that are that. I think the sacraments have all these magical associations with it. Places where I differ with Catholicism is most witches don't believe in original sin. Most witches are pretty feminist oriented, anti-patriarchy, very much about diversity of gender expression and environmental. So a lot of those things don't naturally come with a lot of Catholicism, but in some ways in Christianity it's coming. Like there's strong Christian movements about environmentalism, which is really wonderful to see.
Yeah.
Christopher, a lot of people haven't heard of the Kabbalah, and a lot of people in spirituality do follow it. Can you just talk a little bit about what it's all about, just to give people like a brief understanding of what it is?
Yeah, so the Kabbalah, or if we wanted to be more in the Jewish tradition, Kabbalah, is system of mysticism that is usually associated with the mystical side of Judaism. It often is depicted in something, a form called the Tree of Life, which if you've seen, a lot of us, if you read enough, you'll see the image of it. It looks like 10 circles connected by 22 lines. But depending on time period and branch of the tradition, the lines might look a little different. But what it really depicts is the universe, the cosmos. So each of those circles is like a dimension or a sphere of consciousness, and each of the lines is the way you transition. So it's a very detailed map. It was influenced most likely through Greek Pythagoras teachings, because Pythagoras was all about 10, so there's 10 spheres. But it really became part of the Jewish tradition and part of the scriptural tradition. And then it got involved into Christian Kabbalah, because a lot of Christian mystics were looking into Jewish mysticism. And a lot of people then made comparisons to the pagan traditions. So that pagan branch of it started to be called Hermetic Kabbalah after the god Hermes. And there's a whole series of literature that are called Hermetics. So Hermetic Kabbalah looks at like each of the spheres relating to the planets and relating to ritual and magical practices and astrology, and fairly new in the last 200 years or so, tarot. So each of the pathways relates to tarot cards. And so one of the ways I use it is if you want to change your consciousness, you might figure out, well, where am I and where do I want to go? And what's the tarot card that connects it? And can I meditate on that tarot and live on that tarot card and stare into it and use it like a mandala and really get to know what that tarot card is to kind of bridge that change in me. But it's pretty complex. There's a lot of other teachings and practices around it, but it's basically a map of the universe from the source to the earth and all the permutations in between.
Christopher, do you think there was anything different that your kind of teacher could have done? Or do you think that it was like she did a really great job of kind of aligning things in the way to open this path for you?
Well, both my first mentor and my first teacher were the most perfect for me at that time.
Yeah.
You know, so having a family friend who could make it less scary, because this is someone I knew from when I was 7, I trusted her with my life. Ironically, when I was going to get confirmed in Catholicism, I asked her to be my confirmation sponsor, and she was no longer Catholic at the time, but I didn't know that. I just knew she was raised Catholic. So, and when she said no, I was really hurt because I didn't understand why. And I was like, well, just, you know, I know you don't go to church all the time, but just do it for me. We can do this together. And then later when she told me she was a witch, I was like, oh, I get why you couldn't do it now, you know? And then when she sent me to Laurie Cabot, the thing that was so perfect about studying with Laurie Cabot at that time, because coming out of Catholicism, I was very agnostic and I was searching for like something. And at that time, I was looking into like Taoism, but you can only really find martial arts at that time, or Hinduism, but pretty much all you could find was like yoga at a gym. It wasn't the deeper philosophies. And she had those philosophies, but she defined witchcraft, which is how I still define it, as a science, an art, and a religion. And out of those 3 definitions, I had the hardest time with religion because I was like, oh no, like I don't want another religion. I want spirituality, you know? But as the years have gone by, I understand why it's important to claim the word religion, because a lot of witches don't have equal rights in certain parts of the country, or they can be persecuted more easily. And if you are associated with the legally recognized religion, then it's easier to get those rights or fight for those rights when you've been discriminated against. So a lot of us think religion has to be monotheistic, people of the book, but religion can be anything. It's Buddhism, it's Hinduism, it's, you know, all those things are religions that are protected by the law. But coming from sort of an agnostic science background, it was really important that Laurie Cabot taught. She really approached the framework of why, as a modern person, is this not crazy? Because there was still a part of me that thought this was crazy. So for her to say, well, no, there's principles behind it. And because I started with my art teacher, who was that mentor growing up, you know, it was the creative expression of art, but she was also a classical artist. So she was teaching perspective and, you know, color theory and anatomy. And I learned all those things, you know, growing up with her, or at least, you know, as best I could as a young guy. But that idea that there's always technique fused with creativity. So witchcraft was the same. There's like technique and study and a science. I'd hesitate to call them laws, but they're principles. But then once you know the principles, you can create whatever you want, but you'll create much better if you know, just like with art, how to mix color. And I had a music background at the time when I was doing this all. And, you know, having to learn music theory and rhythm and conducting and, you know, all the technical side of the art of music. It's not just getting up on stage and doing whatever you want. Like there's a science behind it. Like part of music, you had to learn math. You had to understand the ratios. You had to understand how things went. And to realize witchcraft was like art and music, for me, was really important because it gave that balance to think it wasn't just kooky and crazy.
I think a lot of times when we discuss whether it's energy work or manifestation or magic, that people ask about like influencing reality.
Right.
Right. So where do you think the ethical line is? And like, how would you teach someone to distinguish between conscious creation and maybe trying to like control another person's free will?
Oh. And that is a big theme that shows up in magic and witchcraft and occultism. Yeah, absolutely. So, in the modern traditions of witchcraft, there's something that a lot of people, but not everybody adheres to. There's something from the branches of what we call Wicca, which some people would say Wicca is one of the many expressions of the religion of witchcraft, but there's specific branches of it. There's something called the Wiccan Rede, and it says, "And you harm none, do as you will." It's part of a much larger poem, but that's like the core teaching people quote from it. And at face value, it's, well, you can do whatever you want as long as you're not harming another person. But then my teacher, talked about how she said something that at the time I didn't grasp, and I think she thought it was kind of silly of it. She said, "Well, how do you spell will?" And I was like, W-I-L-L, like, how do you spell will? And she's like, "No, really, how do you spell will?" Because in some of the literature, there's a difference when you spell will with a little w and a capital W. So capital W means your soul's will, your true will. And she would teach that the true teaching behind that is, "And it harm none, do as you will, your soul's purpose." If you're doing your soul's purpose, you're not harming anybody else. So that was a huge thing of realizing that, and that philosophy is influenced by another kind of seemingly sinister character that there's a lot of misinformation about out there, a figure called Aleister Crowley, who I mentioned before. He liked to court notoriety and controversy and things like that. But when you actually read his writings, he was very dedicated to the holy sciences, but he didn't suffer the media or fools very lightly, even in the 1920s, So he let people speak badly about him, and he didn't try to correct it because he just figured the right people would be found to him. But he talked a lot about true will being like a star. Like no two stars are fighting in the firmament. The stars all do their dance together perfectly. I know scientifically we know stars can collapse into each other and all that, but from our perspective on Earth, the stars look perfect, right? They look like they're just doing their dance and everything. And he's like, true souls, if you're doing your true will, are like the stars. And one of his quotes was, "Every man and every woman is a star." And so what you're trying to do through magic and witchcraft is become more like your star self, to really radiate what you need, attract the things that you need, and not be in conflict with any other star. But when you're learning it, there's a lot of trial and error. So, some people want what they want when they want it. So the way I teach magic, which again, not everybody does, is we'll put little safety guards and caveats into it. Like, I ask this be for the highest good, harming none, or I ask this be for the good of all involved. So sometimes a spell will fail because it would harm you or somebody else. But even in those quests, like when you do a spell and you get what you want, you either have to realize, oh, that's really what I wanted, I'm satisfied, or, oh, that wasn't really what I wanted. What do I really want? What's my soul calling me to do? Why did I want that thing? So even spells that fail can help us. There's also a teaching of whatever you do out in the world also leaves you open to. So one of the best reasons to not try to control somebody else is that it then makes you easier to be controlled. So it kind of leaves that chink in your magical armor, so I think there's some practices that do that. And throughout history, there's a lot of magic of control and conniving. If you look historically at a lot of the cultures and traditions that have a lot of that, we as modern people will look at it and be like, oh, that looks terrible. That looks I'm aghast by what these types of spells for compelling and controlling people or cursing or all these things. Most of the people in those times and places and cultures didn't have access to justice. So like a lot of it in America comes, like in the hoodoo and conjure traditions, comes from influence from the African diaspora and a lot of Southern folk magic. And it was often taught by people who didn't have access to the money, to the lawyers, to the societal privileges to actually deal with the law. So magic was their way of dealing with justice and getting retribution, getting justice, getting protection. So when you start to look at those things through that lens, you realize, oh, I'm looking at it from my modern 21st century, fairly privileged perspective of what I could ask for in society. And not everybody's always had that. Even back to the Dark and Middle Ages, there's some tough traditional spells that are about keeping a husband home. And you think, oh, well, you're really impeding their will and, things like that. But if a husband left their wife, that wife and child would be destitute in those times. So part of the magic was they made a commitment, you're making them keep that commitment. So I understand the historical context, but as modern witches today and the societies I teach in, we really try to focus on our true will, our true soul's purpose, harming none, and doing really, I see witchcraft as a part of a priesthood, a magical priesthood, and we're here to do the holy work of regenerating the world. So causing unnecessary harm and trying to control others doesn't add to that work. Sorry, that was a very long-winded ethical conversation. That was like a year 5 conversation, not a year 1 conversation. I apologize.
I think like that's the information that, I think it's helpful for people to hear, because there's just, and we've said this before, like for me, like I'm kind of the curious soul, right? Like I want to know more about these things, because I think there's so much in this world that it can be good and it's filled with love, and it's, if you have a negative connotation with something, then people are just going to kind of put up the wall and block away from it. But when they actually can be, introduced to something through just conversation, that might actually ignite something in them that's like, I didn't know that. Okay, now I can be open to it. I can, maybe be a little bit more accepting or learn more. So I appreciate it very much.
Excellent.
Christopher, can you talk a little bit about maybe the connection between magic and manifestation?
So I think magic is a branch of magic, because magic has many meanings to it, but a branch of magic is the more formalized or ritualized form of manifestation. A big part of my life, I have one foot deeply immersed in the occult world. And for a very long time, I had one foot deeply immersed in the new age, holistic health, light worker kind of paradigm. And that's where manifestation might be used, and spiritualist and theosophist, all of that was on that side. And I felt the tension of trying to bridge those two worlds. And one of the things I'll often tell people who do manifestation or do any type of psychic work is, back in the times of persecution against witchcraft and magic, you'd be as persecuted as I was. It's like, if you think you can manifest something, that's an act of magic. I think a lot of modern manifestation is less connected in most practices to nature, and it tends to be a little bit more about mental magic, and it tends to be a little bit more about visualization, which is a big part of it. It got more popular in the late 19th, early 20th century through a movement called New Thought. Prior to that, though, a lot of what we would call manifestation was spells. You would hold an intention, you would pray in a very specific way, but you'd focus on something. Even going back to our Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox traditions, like there was aided visualization for when you were making a prayer to try to make something happen. You'd stare at the saint statue, you would stare at the stained glass in the church, but you were visualizing. You were given something to visualize on, but you were visualizing something. Today we talk about like visualizing the money coming to you, or the new car coming to you, or the health in your body changing. But it's the same mechanism of aligning synchronicity through clear intention to manifest a new reality. And that's what magic is too, at least the spell side of magic. The holiest art of magic is communing or being self-possessed by your higher self. But part of the path to get there is, well, what are the things I need in my life? You learn as part of the magical priesthood to manifest the things you want, which is really fun when you first start learning, because you start to think, oh, everything's going to work now. And then you realize pretty wisely on that the other side of magic is banishing the things you don't want, and making room and creating space and encouraging silence and stillness. And then you sort of find an equilibrium between the two. And then you realize not that those don't matter, but there's something bigger beyond that. And that bigger part is the mystery, is initiation, is becoming a better person and doing your soul's work in the world. I feel like a lot of modern manifestation doesn't always have the context. Like in magic and ceremonial magic, witchcraft, you kind of build yourself up to get all the things that you need till you're sort of at that top point in the hierarchy of self-realization. And then it sort of inverts upward, and then you have to keep on giving back. And a lot of people get to the point of getting the stuff that they want and they sort of think that they're done, or they just keep focusing on wanting rather than now you have the power to create. How are you using that power to create for others as well?
Go ahead, Julia.
Do you think that modern witchcraft is evolving into something other than what it was maybe like 50 years ago?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, witchcraft, I mean, I think everything is changing incredibly rapidly. Everything, like.
I was gonna say, you made the comment about like, years ago people would, use a spell, or, they would do something to like keep a husband at home, or because we didn't have justice. So I'm just thinking like so many things have changed, right? So I would think that there's, this modern witchcraft is much different than what it used to be years ago.
And some would even say we're hearkening back to the even older spirit. If you look at the arc of what modern witches think our history is, which you got to remember, every spiritual tradition has their own mythos, right? Even Christianity and Judaism, there's many things in the Bible you can't prove as history, but people take it as history. The difficulty with modern witchcraft is we've got the internet for people to argue about it, rather than just take it on faith that it's a tradition. But we look at witches, or at least the branch of witchcraft I'm in, looks at witches as starting with like the shamans and the healers and the medicine people of Stone Age Neolithic society. And then that evolved into our first city states of, ancient civilizations. And we were the priesthood in the temples. And then as more mainstream and monotheistic religions kind of came about, we were sort of kicked out of the temples. And, new temples and new religions arose, and we became the fringe. And in that fringe, we sort of couldn't keep those same traditions. So things had to go into hiding, things sort of devolved, things became folk magic. And then you have the resurgence of witchcraft. So in the, Middle Ages, you've got the grimoire traditions where it's big books of spirits and how to summon angels and demons and all that type of stuff. And then into the Enlightenment period, you've got Hermeticism coming up, and people want the philosophies of ancient Egypt and Sumeria and astrology and all that stuff kind of comes up. In Britain, particularly in the 1800s and 1900s, it's about the cunning people and the healers, and they're fulfilling sort of the role of the shaman, but maybe not the way a shaman would in tribal society, but it's the village healer, the village witch, who people would go to find lost objects and to heal burns and to, recover from illnesses. And then by the time we get to the 20th century, we've got these like covens that start popping up saying like, we're the secret inheritors of these special traditions, which may or may not have been true. Some of that might have been people cobbling together things that they wanted to, but they created a tradition that was spiritually rooted to what came before. And so, when my teachers learned you had to join a coven and you had to be initiated, you just couldn't call yourself a witch, and you had to go through a process, and there was very specific training and rituals and a sequence of events you had to go through to be a witch. And then by the time I was getting into it, it was more open, but there was a lot more emphasis on the holiness of what we do, that we're part of a priesthood, that we're trying to heal people, that we're trying to heal the world. And now with the advent of social media, there's 1,000,001 different definitions of witchcraft. And, and I don't think that's bad. I don't think anybody should police what is and isn't witchcraft. But today, when someone says, oh, I'm a witch, and I don't know them or I don't know their background, my first question is like, oh, that's great. What does that mean to you? Or what does that look like? Because what they mean by witch might be aesthetic. It might be how they dress or what they think, or they might do a little bit of magic. They might not think of themselves as priesthood. They might not think of themselves as healers. So that's, it's like anything else. Like somebody can say I'm a Christian, and that can mean a lot of different things today too, so it's figuring out, well, what do you mean by that? What is that? How does that show up in your life? Because different branches of Christianity will be radically different, just like different groups of witchcraft. Although witchcraft is so individualistic, it's super hard to just use one term. Someone might say I'm a green witch, and I'm like, does that mean you grow a garden? Does that mean you're an herbalist? Does that mean you make potions? Like, what does that mean? So it's good to ask questions and have those conversations. But I think it's changing so much. And for me, I'm trying to change it in my community at the Temple of Witchcraft. We're looking at the model of a temple. We're looking at the model of a magical order, because a lot of covens can be wonderful when they're held well and can go really toxic when they're not, because it's a group of intense people together we're sort of playing out a family dynamic. So if you don't have good relationships with your parents, your siblings, your children, you can project that into a small magical group and have it go not great. And so some people want to learn, and they want to learn the depths of the teachings, but they don't want to join a coven. So like I have an academic model, there's school and there's degrees and there's requirements, and we have multiple people look at things so nobody can be favorite. And, there's more, although at times it can seem more academic and more administrative, there's ways to prevent people from being shut out or discriminated against, or emotions getting in the way from people actually having the experiences that they want to experience. But that's relatively new. Like witchcraft schools have only popped up in the last 25 years or so. Before that, it was all coven based. And I'm sure if we had this conversation 30 years from now, there'd be something different going on too.
Yeah. Do you think
Just take a
that
quick break. Hang tight, guys. We'll be right back. Okay, Julia.
are there any like specific traditions that you would like to see preserved?
I would like all witchcraft traditions that are serving a greater good to flourish. So there's things I might not participate in that I think really serve. Like we have a kind of the original branch that we owe everything to in the modern era is what people sometimes refer to as traditional Wicca or British traditional Wicca. And those are the most conservative and initiatory, and you have to be initiated by somebody to be a part of it. You can't just claim it. But a lot of people have been very generous, and sometimes against their will generous, in sharing a lot of the material from those traditions. And that provided a huge foundation for the rest of us. So I'd like to see those continue. There was a time when they were getting less popular, and now they're popular again. So that's nice to see. My first initiation, my first tradition was the Cabot tradition of witchcraft. So I love seeing them thrive. And Lori Cabot in her 90s is still, going strong and still teaching every so often. And the community down in Salem, Massachusetts is still doing wonderful things. And I'd like to see communities grow. It might not always be about traditions, but I'd like to see communities flourish. Like I absolutely love a community in the Delaware area called the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel. It's really wonderful to see their growth because they're very much like myself, rooted in the past, but also moving towards the future in some different ways than we do. They're very coven-based. But I love to see those traditions preserved. And I just love to see the folklore and the history itself preserved. There's more museums of witchcraft now than ever before. There's a museum in Cornwall, England. There's a museum in Cleveland, Ohio. And there's more things. There's one in Edinburgh, Scotland. And I'd like to see more of them just kind of preserving the history and the artifacts and creating public places for people who are not witches to interface with that history and to understand it.
Now you had made a comment before about like a green witch, and you had talked about like an herbalist or somebody who has a garden. And I would be amiss to not bring up about like nature, right?
Absolutely.
I think my grandmother's tickled pink because I now have property, I have chickens, I'm growing more herbs, and I have a garden, and I'm spending more time in nature. And I'm fascinated by the intelligence of nature. I'm curious about, your thoughts about like what nature has the ability to teach us that maybe another human could not.
Well, nature's really the first teacher. We look at nature literally as the goddess, as Mother Nature. From our teachings, there's two different ways to look at the goddess. So some people look at the goddess as a triple goddess, which is very popular. And sometimes people make the misunderstanding that it's just about biology. So we often describe the triple goddess as Maiden, Mother, Crone. But she's also really the past, the present, the future. So she's any process like nature that unfolds in time. But she's also the heavens, the stars, and she's the earth, and she's the underworld. And so, when I say she's the heavens, she's the star goddess. Nature is the stars, the universe unfolding, all those cosmic processes. When we tend to think of nature as humans, we tend to think of the biosphere of the planet, right? But the whole biosphere of the planet is Gaia, is Mother Earth, and so the idea of every part of the earth is a system within her body, including humanity. And I think our biggest challenge as modern people today is figuring out consciously what our role is in the body of Mother Earth, because we can either be the nervous system, the immune system, the endocrine system, or cancer. And right now we're acting like cancer. So we've got to figure out how to live in better harmony with that. And then when we talk about her being the underworld, she's the invisible, numinous Holy Spirit that pervades everything in the world. So there's the visible nature, what some of the old teachings would call Isis veil. So it's the trees and the forest and the mountains and the rivers. And within the body of the goddess, just like we have organs and cells, she's got spirits and locations and individuals. So you can commune with a rock, you can commune with the mountain, you can commune with the flower, you can commune with the whole garden, and they all have different things to teach based on their collective intelligence and spirit. So like in herbalism, people would say, well, the old wise woman or the old witch, like, you know, from a scientific perspective, how did she get her knowledge? It had to be trial and error. But if you went to the healer of your village and she says, well, I don't know if this is going to cure you, but let me give you some belladonna, and you die, who's going to go back to her, you know, or him, or whoever it may be? You know, that idea that, you know, if it's trial and error, if you talk to indigenous people today, and if you talk to modern herbalists with a spirited view of this, they will say the plants taught them. The plants will teach you what they can be used for medicine, what they can be used for magic, and then you start to extrapolate bigger life lessons that we as humans have forgotten. You know, like a interesting one of my strongest spirit allies from the green world is stinging nettle. And stinging nettle is this great fairy plant, and it's great in medicine. I had an herbal teacher whose teacher to her said, if you don't know what's wrong with somebody, give them stinging nettles for 8 weeks and it'll probably cure them. You know, because it's just such a nutritive and healer and everything. And as you get into the magic about it, it's about being sharp because it stings. So if you need something that's protective, if you need something that's defensive, like people are not just going to walk through a patch of stinging nettles. So if you need to protect yourself, you'd use stinging nettle to protect yourself. But then the deeper spiritual message of stinging nettle is let go of the things that are hurting you. You know, the more you try to grasp onto something that's harmful, the more it's going to sting you. Can you let go of it? Can you respect it? Can you commune with that without violating boundaries? And that's something I think humans forget. So every plant has something like that. Some are more bigger personalities than others. Some have more lore around them. And then you get into that Isis unveiled, the goddess unveiled. What is the Holy Spirit, or what we call the soul of the world or the soul of the universe that animates everything? And if I had to give a definition of what witches honor and venerate, it's the soul of the world. We sometimes see the soul of the world as the stars and the moon. We sometimes see the soul of the world as nature. And we sometimes see the soul of the world as that invisible presence that's in everything, including each of us. So when I have a conflict with somebody, I have to realize, oh, like you are also part of the world. You're also part of the soul of the world. You have as much of a right to be and do and have your experiences I'm having, even if we're in conflict together, because we're part of the same body. And I think that's a huge lesson for us to get, but it's really hard to live from.
Christopher, can you give people advice, just moving through this chaotic world that we are right now? What advice could you give people on, like, maybe where they can find a little bit of magic to get through their day, and also how connecting or making connections with other like-minded individuals in different communities can help, like, the collective support?
I think my advice for both of those things is the same. Do the good that is before you. So I think, you know, the world is overwhelming right now. The world is crazy right now. I wish I had better specific advice of this is what we should all do and the world will be better, you know, instantly, but I don't think that's going to happen instantly. And it can be very overwhelming to think we have to control or contribute to everything all at once, all the time, because there's multiple crises going on. So what is the good you have control over that you can do before you? And that is going to cause you to be the magic for someone else. And doing the good before you is going to remind you, if you practice some form of magic, make that a part of your life. Sometimes people think, well, magic's what happens when I'm meditating or when I'm before the altar, but magic is an everyday of life, and magic can be the kind word. Magic can be the listening ear. Magic can be the loving presence someplace. We often talk about in magical circles, there's a theory that says that the world has been disenchanted. And part of our work is to re-enchant the world by reinvigorating a spiritual, magical worldview in everyday things. So approaching everything, the sense that everything's alive and everything is filled with wonder and everything deserves kindness, including other people, because that can be the hardest part of it. And do the good for yourself and for others that's before you. And that also starts to create the connections with other people, because people, you might do the good with someone else, and then you've made a new friend, or you've made a new connection, or it might lead you to a new group or new event or new class or whatever it may be. But I think rather than kind of wring your hands of what you can't control of, look at the thing that's before you. So if you can help offer solace to somebody, like a lot of the work of the witch was the work of the midwife and the work of the death doula and the work of the healer. And sometimes healing is just offering what aid you can, so if you can offer aid in that moment, you'll make those connections and you'll start to see things from a more enchanted view. As much as I want to despair about how the world can be at times, I also have to look at like, what of this is necessary? Yet in that necessity, because one of the names of the goddess of fate is Ananke, which translates to necessity. So I often think I serve the goddess of necessity. It's not what I want, it's what's needed. But in that need, you can mitigate harm. Even if things need to end, or systems need to collapse, or different things need to change to create growth and room for new things, you can mitigate the harm. You can help the person that's before you, and you can help yourself as well. So whatever the good is before you, I think take that risk, take that chance, and do the good.
Can you also talk a little bit about what are some simple ways that people can protect their energy moving through the world right now?
I think grounding, centering, and shielding are the huge things. So to grounding means to be kind of both anchored and present in your body, and anchored and present upon the earth. The easiest way from a witch's perspective to do that is either from the base of your spine, because we call it the root chakra. Imagine a root descending into the earth, or from the soles of your feet, or both. Imagine roots coming out. But as soon as you feel off kilter, you feel off balance, someone says or does something, or you read a news report that says or does something that pushes you off center, just take a moment, breathe, and root yourself, ground yourself. Centering, some people confuse centering with grounding. Centering is finding your center, both your balance point in your body, but also your energetic center. So sometimes people like to visualize it towards the lower part of their body. Others like to visualize it as their heart, because that's like the center of the chakra column. There's 3 above and 3 below. But whatever means centering and balancing for yourself, like sometimes in our energy field, if we're centered, we might push more into the logical, or we might push more into the emotional and overreact. It's like, am I responding from the center place where I can access my emotions and I can access my logic and do so in a balanced way for what's there? So just envisioning yourself in the center, or a symbol that means centering for you. So I like the equal armed cross. So it's just like an equal armed cross in a circle, and I imagine that in my heart. And then shielding. I think shielding, it's looking at the edge of your energy field, what people call the aura, and imagine it having a permeable boundary, a boundary that acts like a filter. I know some teachings say it has to be white light, or it has to be opaque, or it has to be black, or whatever it is. I look at like clear glass or clear crystal that's been programmed, enchanted to allow in the things that are good and helpful for you, and to block out and neutralize the things that would be harmful for you, based on whether it be good or not for you. So sometimes people will say, I want all the good energy of everything, but taking a lot of one thing on can be harmful for you. Just like, if you take all of a medical prescription, you take the whole bottle, you're an overdose on it. So you want the balanced amount of it. But a big thing that can be helpful for a lot of people who might not have a robust magical practice is wearing some type of talisman, wearing some type of amulet, some type of carrying a crystal, carrying a pouch of herbs or a root. One of the things that I like to wear, part of our priesthood for witchcraft, is wearing a necklace of amber and jet, which we receive this on our initiations, but you can still carry a piece of amber, you can still carry a piece of jet, you can wear other stones like tourmaline or smoky quartz. You might take herbs to help you with it too. Like, I'm a big believer in flower essences, which you can get at most health food stores. Yarrow flower essence is excellent to keep you shielded, because it just seals the holes, just like yarrow as an herb seals cuts and bruises. If you have holes in your aura, yarrow seals it and strengthens the aura so things can't get into it. So working with nature, whether it be stones or plants, is a great way to kind of bolster yourself too, because sometimes it can be exhausting just to constantly focus on your meditations and your energy. Sometimes you need that help. So I carry stones, I wear magical jewelry, I'll change out what I'm carrying with me based on the day, just to figure out, what are my needs today. If I'm going to see a lot of people, I might wear a particular thing. If I'm going in a particularly toxic environment, I might carry something heavier. If I'm going to be home all day writing, I might carry something that's lighter and more creative, but it's working with these aspects of nature and then realizing that we use them as seemingly as tools, like carrying a crystal or taking an herb, but they're also our teachers. So to spend some time meditating with the crystal and see if it has a message for you or wants to tell you something. Sit and meditate with the plants, whether they're living or in a herbal form, extract form, and see if they have something they want to whisper to you, because they're alive and they're our teachers.
So I'm actually happy that Leo asked his question first. I'm a physical therapist, and I often see symptoms that are just rooted in maybe like unresolved emotional experiences, and just the trauma that sits in the body and can, I think in some ways it does show physically. From your perspective, what role would you say ritual or spiritual practice could play in helping someone heal their trauma? Maybe not just emotionally, but also at the level of the soul.
Oh, I think spiritual practice of any kind that is open-hearted, whether it's witchcraft or not, but particularly my area of expertise is magic and witchcraft, I think is ultimately healing because it's constantly moving the energy. It's moving the energy and it's catalyzing your consciousness to grow and to evolve and to change. And I think all of those things make you and your vessel better, whether it's your physical body, emotional body, mental body, spiritual body. I think all the changes, magic is change ultimately. If we went back to that first question, what is magic? Magic is change, but ultimately change for the better, hopefully. And that idea of magic as an evolutionary path. So even if you're just keeping a devotional meditative practice with no big spells, you're going to commune with the spirits. When the spirits touch you, they change you. And it's good to remember when you touch them, they change as well. So everything's helping each other evolve. But I think any type of practice, it shifts the body, it shifts the mind, it shifts our consciousness. One of the things people don't like to talk about in magic is serious magic is much like an Olympic sport. Like you have to condition your body and your energetic bodies. And as you get older, you can't really do all the things you thought you could do when you're younger. If you get into the practice when you're young, you have a lot of vitality and power in those early decades. And as you get older, you realize, oh, now's my time to coach people. Now's my time to write down what I know. Now's my time to kind of share it with people, because there's a vitality to it. And magicians and witches often have illnesses that are not normal. And it's because so much of and I think metaphysical and spiritualists and other types of healers have the same issues because we're shifting the endocrine system. We're shifting the energetic body. Like when we move energy, our body chemistry responds to that in a way most people don't move. So when we have an illness and we bring it to a doctor, they're often stumped. So I think also it's working with magical healers because a lot of our problems and symptoms are rooted in magic. They're more alleviated by magic than a lot of pharmaceutical medicine.
Christopher, oftentimes we'll talk about intuition with our guests. And, a lot of times when we listen to it, it guides us in the right direction. And when we don't listen to it, we always know how that goes. But can you just tell people a little bit about, like, how can they hear and listen and pick up their intuition?
Encouraging a practice of both stillness and silence, and also clearing and cleansing yourself as much as possible. Because, when you teach intuitive or psychic development classes, you'll often tell people, always follow your intuition. And then someone invariably does, and it's wrong. And then they get really mad at you because they're like, I followed my intuition, it was wrong. We got a lot of stuff, we got like a lot of things in our emotional body. We got a lot of clouds. And a lot of psychic development doesn't encourage cleansing those first, which I get it because it's not as sexy and people want to have a profound experience at first. And I know I did too. I totally get it. But like in serious witchcraft training for people who take my school and my courses, we spend a year on introspection and meditation and building power. before we ever get to spells, and we sort of do verified psychic experiences so you can feel what those are like astral travel or psychic diagnosis, because then that helps you weed out the experiences that might be fantasy or illusion. But I think the kind of key point of it for me is meditation, but it's something that engenders you to be quiet to listen, because a lot of people want to be psychic. Don't stop talking, whether it's literally verbally don't stop talking or their internal chatter just doesn't stop talking. How can you hear something or see something or pay attention to it if you have no awareness to it? So you really have to kind of cultivate awareness, slow down, listen, be still, get to know yourself. And I think those are the things that help, at least have helped me with psychic ability and intuitive processes.
Great advice.
Have you ever had an experience that you still can't explain?
Well, the beautiful thing about studying occultism, there's always philosophies and mechanisms to explain everything. Do I have things that I can't quite believe? Yes, but not so much that I can't explain. And I mean, even going back to although it was not an initiation ritual, I think there are things that we call initiation experiences. And I'm still blown away and marveled and get goosebumps when I think of my first experience. So I'm in my early training with Lori Cabot in Salem, Mass. 19 at the time, I think. And, she demonstrates psychic diagnosis. So where you get the name and age and location of somebody you've never met, and someone who knows them has a piece of paper with all their description and a diagnosed illness that they have from a doctor, but you can't see any of that. And she teaches a technique where you tune into them and you get their description and you narrow in on what their illness is. And so I first went in, coming from my mentor and still being a little agnostic, going, no one can do this. To, all right, I see her do it, thinking first, doubting person that I am, was like, was that person a plant? Like, was this planned all along? And then to see her repeat it with people I knew and be like, all right, well, that's not a plant, so she's doing it. All right, well, maybe she can do it, but I'm not going to be able to do it. And she's like, no, if you follow this program, you'll be able to do it. And then to do it and to be so blown away, like I was skeptical but open-minded. So I was like, I'm going to prove this is not right by doing all the things and still not working. And it worked. And the moment of illumination I had that night, just contemplating it, that if I could connect to someone whom I did not know and receive this information, and if the theories around it that we were studying were true, then that also meant I was broadcasting. And I was pretty unhappy at that time. So I'm like, I am responsible for all the things I'm broadcasting out to the world, my sadness, my grief, my anger, all of these things of, 90s queer boy growing up closeted, so that idea of the just the ire that I had for the world at that time, and having to have that realization that I, even by doing nothing, was contributing to the detriment of the world. And so I needed to take responsibility first for my consciousness before I could do anything else. And that's really when I decided I wanted to be a witch. So I've had ghost experiences. I get how that works and the various theories of it. I've had spontaneous healing experiences with clients and myself, and I get how that works. So there's not the mystery of the how, but I think there's the mystery in it actually happening, because even though it's a science, you can never guarantee it happening. It's not a physical science in the sense that when you mix two chemicals together, it's always the same. Like I've had people who've, come to my practice with cancer and now they no longer have cancer and they didn't do any pharmaceutical stuff. And I couldn't repeat that when family members had cancer, so it's that type of thing that you can't always have it go 100% the way you always want, but that's still a mystery to have that person no longer have cancer, and such a blessing and such a honor to be a part of that magic,
If you could ask the universe one question and be guaranteed an answer, what would it be?
I don't think I have questions like that. Yeah, no, I feel like, part of the mystery is the unfolding of it. Yeah, I don't like when people say, what would you ask God upon death and all that? And I don't really have anything like that. When this life is over, there's divine, wonderful loved ones I'd like to see again, but I don't think I have a lot of questions about it. I think I'm pretty good on that.
Since our podcast is called Mystery of the Soul, what could you just talk about maybe one mystery of the soul that people have that they wonder about, or maybe if you have a mystery of the soul? I mean, I don't know if that goes into what she just asked you, but
yeah. So Interesting for what you've just asked me. So a big part of being an occultist, and I guess why I don't have the questions, is because occultism makes maps and realizes that none of the maps are actually the absolute answer. But one of my favorite maps on the soul, the mystery of the soul, from a modern witch's perspective, harkening back to ancient teachings, but it's something I teach that upsets a lot of people. So hopefully you're okay with that. So one of the teachings of the soul that modern witches look to is that you don't have one soul. You have many souls. I like to teach people you have 3 souls with options to buy more. I'm only joking about that, but you have options to craft more. I think witchcraft at its heart, even though it's the craft of making potions and charms and things like that, is really the crafting of the soul. A lot of the old words to witchcraft go back to like chemical and plant dyes and changing colors of things. And a lot of the old temple practices were about how to, dye fabric or how to change the enamel and the coverings of statues and temple walls and things like that. But I think in truth, we're changing the colors of our energy and our consciousness and our soul. So we teach you have at least a higher soul, a middle soul, and a lower soul. And part of your magical practices reconfigures those 3 souls in different ways over time. And you're literally changing your esoteric anatomy. And that change in anatomy allows you to hold greater consciousness and greater power and greater awareness to do witchcraft and magic. So there's physiological changes, which is why sometimes people have those illnesses, but also can have amazing health and not know why. Like some of the most healthy magicians I know have terrible diets and don't do any of the things doctors recommend, but they move energy in such a way and have configured their consciousness in such a way. I had one teacher who, ate white bread and butter sandwiches. She was from England, and like that was her staple food. And she was a bit heavy set and exercised a lot. She used to swim in her youth, but she just had such a consciousness and lived into her 90s healthy, and was just the most kick-ass magician I knew of her generation. But she didn't do any of the things we think of as holistic health. I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but it's just interesting to watch what happens when consciousness gets configured in different ways.
So I'll piggyback on that question. So what do you believe the soul is here to experience?
Anything and everything.
Okay.
So one of my teachers said, so one of the terms in Hermetic Kabbalah and Hermetic witchcraft is the divine mind. And we're all thoughts in the divine mind. So we're all experiencing the whole reality that we have in, for lack of a better word, for when I'm talking to mainstream folk, would say the mind of God, the mind of the creator. So we're not outside of the creator, but we're inside the creator because we're inside the creator's mind. And so she used to teach all of our past life experiences and when people say this is a school and a lesson, as humans, we put a lot of moral judgment to that. Like you're here to learn to be good. You're here to learn to love. You're here to learn these things. She didn't teach that at all. She said, you're here to learn to experience everything. And when you experience one side of the polarity, you're going to experience the other side of the polarity. And she thought it was without judgment. I don't know if I agree, but I feel like it's an interesting model to think about. So she said, if your mind is like this and you're inside this great divine mind, every experience sort of grows you bigger and bigger. And what you're trying to do is to be equal with the divine mind. And that would be when people think of nirvana or when they think of, merging with the all. To merge with the all, you have to experience the all. So if you experience something violent as a perpetrator, you're going to experience that similar violent thing as the victim. If you experience giving love, you're going to experience receiving love. And sometimes that's in the same lifetime, sometimes it's not, but you're trying to balance and expand through all the polarities of experience, not just human. She believed you had to experience everything, so it wasn't like you could expand to the oversoul of humanity and become one with humanity, but eventually humanity had to become with the stars and with the divine creator and constantly expanding consciousness out, which is kind of an interesting model to think about. I'd still like to think we're learning through love. I'd still like to think that we're seeking harmony, but that might be my own human projections. I realize I prefer a harmonious world over a tumultuous world, but I don't know if that's the way the world works or the universe works.
Is there anything before we wrap up, Christopher? Whatever else, if there's advice or anything else you want to say to our audience or you want to leave them with?
Well, if you're looking to walk a magical path, I'd say one of the best advices that I've kind of incorporated from teachers and kind of made into a little shorter saying to think about, is that when you start out in magic, start by learning magic. So study, read, understand the principles, understand the correspondences. Just like if you're going to build something complex, figure out how it works before you go fiddling with stuff. And then once you study the magic, do magic, because the only way you're going to learn it is by actually doing it. We have a lot of people we call armchair magicians, and they like to read a ton of books. They're probably more well-read than I am, but they don't actually do anything with it. So there's a point where you have to not stop reading, but you have to start applying the things that you read. And like any science, it's experimental. So you're going to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, but be judicious in your view of things. So don't make big mistakes. Don't be foolhardily, but explore, experiment, kind of push the envelope. And then as you learn magic and you do magic, you become magic. And you start to realize your whole life is one big magical ritual from birth to death. And it's really dedicated to your soul's purpose. And every interaction you're having isn't just an opportunity to do magic, it is magic. When you're eating your dinner, that's magic. When you're having a conversation with somebody, whether it's an easy or hard conversation, that's magic. Whether you're gardening out and picking weeds, that's magic. Whether you're driving to work, that's magic. If you can change your perspective, but a lot of people want to just jump to the idea of like, oh, I'm magic all the time, but they can't really integrate it. To integrate it, you have to actually practice magic. So learn magic, do magic, be magic would be my best advice.
Awesome. Did you have anything else, Julia?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure I could keep asking questions.
I'm sure. Yeah, we could chat for a lot longer. So before we go, Christopher, tell people how they can reach you and learn more about you and how they can connect and work with you and the Temple of Witchcraft.
Yeah, so where I spend most of my time and energy is the Temple of Witchcraft. So our website is just templeofwitchcraft.org, and we've got the various social medias out there. We run a mystery school, and we run a variety of programs, both long-term, short-term, and one night. So you're always welcome just to kind of check something out, or if you want longer, serious teachings. We have some that have no homework, that are just study at your own pace. And then we've got others that require supervision and homework and evaluation and things like that. And then for my personal work and my personal writings, you can look at ChristopherPenczak.com. And you might also want to check out coppercauldronpublishing.com, which is one of the publishing companies I'm one of the owners in. And primarily most of my books come out through that company these days.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. And this was an awesome conversation, Christopher. And just everyone, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share us. And we will talk soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
And to our listeners, if something stirred in your body, your breath, or your awareness during this conversation, trust that. Healing doesn't always arrive as answers. Sometimes it arrives as resonance.
And if you want more information on Mystery of the Soul, go to our website at www.mysteryofthesoul.com. And if you're interested in more about Leo's services, go to his website at www.leojmccarthy.com, and you can always book a free discovery session with him.
And if you're interested in the services that I'm able to provide, please visit arisewithjulia.com for any information about Dr. Julia LeBlanc. This has been Mystery of the Soul. Until next time, stay curious, stay embodied, and keep listening.